Welcome to Crossover the Pond, brought to you by 21 Media Productions and Sports Social. He's Drew Lasker, I'm Josh Sexton, and this is another episode as we continue our NBA basketball journey, a short hezzy tween and stutter step away here in the UK. Plenty to get into today. The NBA is back in the full swing of things after an all-star break for myself, Andrew, as well as the NBA players and coaching staff. So we want to talk about anti-tanking measures because some things take absolutely no breaks, and it seems like tanking and the tanks of the NBA are definitely not slowing down anytime soon. So I want to quiz Drew on what he thinks the NBA should be doing to combat tanking. We're going to talk about Jonathan Kuminga's big game for the Atlanta Hawks and the other players that are lifting their new teams right now as we're recording this. And I also want to talk about Spurs v the Pistons as well, because it was a hot game in terms of the contender race of NBA championship contenders right now. So we'll talk about that and the others, runners and riders from the contender race, and as usual do our understated stories and bold predictions to finish. But before I ask any questions pertaining to the basketball, Drew, the most important question I have to ask is, how are you?
Man, you know what? The other day I looked outside and I saw a little glimmer of that little yellow round thing that we haven't seen in such long, and the skies are beginning to clear up. It's beginning to dry up because those that live around the world, it rained every single day in the UK in 2026, but there is the light at the end of the tunnel.
There absolutely is, light at the end of the tunnel. Spring is hopefully springing sometime soon for me and Drew here over the pond. If you're listening to this from the right side of the pond, at least for NBA basketball, then we hope the extreme weather isn't too extreme, whichever direction that comes, really. We've seen a lot of snow over there. I guess we're kind of jealous because snow feels like it's more fun than rain. So, you know, me and Drew are still jealous, whether you're on the East Coast getting snow or the West Coast getting all of that sunshine. As usual, we will always be eternally jealous of that. So we'll talk about the first topic that I alluded to at the start of the show there, Drew, in terms of these anti-tanking measures. Then I'll actually get up the tweet from Shams the other day because it was probably the most sort of telling, really, in terms of what's on the table from the NBA's perspective at the moment. It's clear, you know, Adam Silver came out after the All-Star game and sort of slammed tanking. It was probably the most direct I've seen him be about anything that's sort of off-court NBA stuff in recent times. So really interesting to see, you know, the different measures that the NBA may bring in. And I want to get your thoughts on some of these, Drew, because I've been listening to the Bill Simmons podcast a fair bit the last few days as well, and hearing him speculating about all these sort of different things. And there are some like crazy ones. Like there was a point where Bill Simmons was getting to the point of talking about like one, and I was like, I know where he's going, and I completely agree. And then he went off on a complete tangent, so I'm interested to hear what you've got in mind for this. But what Shams says is currently on the table are the idea of first-round picks only being protected top 4 or top 14. As someone who recently saw the Clippers receive a pick that was protected top like 9, is it? And then between 10 and 30 or something, or between 5 and 9 and then 10 and 30. I'm all for banning pick protections. I think it's all too confusing. Lottery odds being frozen at the trade deadline or a later date, which is something I'm also in favour of, to be honest. I think there's a way to stop teams from sort of still tinkering with things after the trade deadline. No longer allowing a team, I should say, to pick top 4 in consecutive years and or after consecutive bottom 3 finishes. Teams can't pick top 4 the year after making conference finals, which is, of course, basically only pertaining to 2 teams that I can think of in recent times, which is the Golden State Warriors after they won the championship, I think, and then picked high up the next season, and the Indiana Pacers this season. Lottery odds allocated based on 2-year records, which the WNBA already does and is very effective there. And lottery extended to include all playing teams and flatten odds for all lottery teams. So a lot to sort of get our teeth into there, Drew. Are there any that stick out to you in terms of like, I think the no-brainers, or you think it's a quite left field idea, but you really like it?
Well, first of all, I'm going to ask you the question. Do you think that most NBA fans are casual fans, or would you describe them as deep analysis or deep analyst?
I would say the majority are probably casual fans. How do you feel?
Okay, I agree with that. Like most people are in sports, whether you go down the NBA, NFL, Premier League, whatever your cup of tea is. Most fans are casual fans who follow the standings. They know the rules, they look at the scores, and they go to work and they go on about their everyday life. Okay. I would describe myself as an analyst because obviously that's my job, right? And I follow the NBA. I look at the scores every morning. I watch some games. I look at the box scores. I look at everything. Everything you just read out from Shams, and the first time that I saw this come out, I said, huh? I scratched my head in massive confusion because this is just so confusing and it's becoming more and more complicated. If it's unfortunate that we get to this point where we have to try to manipulate the system just to get people just to play games and just try to win the games. Let me give context here. This is happening because people are purposely trying to lose. And I understand because, one player can change your franchise. When you look at the NFL, it's the quarterback that can change your franchise. But most of the time, for the most part, one player isn't going to change your fortune. But in NBA, one guy, one LeBron James, one Luka Doncic, one guy could do it. And so I understand from that perspective, but this is the most logical thing that I saw out there on Twitter sphere because, as you know, Josh, there's so many ideas, and so you can go down rabbit holes in how you should fix this tanking situation or this lottery situation. However, here's the most logical thing that I saw, the most easiest way. All teams who don't make the lottery, which is 14 teams, you just get one ping pong ball. That's it. And let the best man win because technically, I wish I had wrote this down. I didn't, but I think the worst team in the last 25 years has gotten the number one pick twice in 25 years. So it is a lottery. It's a lottery system. It depends on where the ping pongs bounce that day. One ping pong ball for all teams that don't make the lottery. I mean, it doesn't make the playoffs, and I think you just simplify this system.
Yeah, so Drew in favor, I should say, of flattening the odds for the lottery. There, that felt like a mouthful to say. Lots of flirt and lurt and f going on there for my liking. So my one, Drew, I'm gonna have to be careful how I explain this because in my head it's simple, but I don't want to go down the route of confusing even more. So Bill Simmons.
Do I need a notepad and a piece of paper?
Yeah, just pull out, click the pen, stick your glasses on, whatever you can do to make your brain power more expanded for this. No, basically Bill Simmons was talking about the idea of like splitting the league into two at a certain point of the season. So whether it's like the trade deadline or something, and having like almost the teams that are good and are competing for something play each other, and having the bad teams play each other. And the guy who was on the podcast with Bill, I can't remember who it was at the time, so apologies for that, was basically saying like, well, what incentive is there for the bad teams? And Bill was like, oh well, there won't be any. And I was like, no, like you were nearly there. The incentive for the bad teams is that they play for their odds in the draft, or they play for their position in the draft. So basically what you effectively get is like, if you're going to freeze the lottery odds at the trade deadline or whatever, let's just make the trade deadline the end of, like, in theory, the NBA season. I don't know how you kind of expand the playoffs and make it worthwhile for the top 8 teams. I'll have to sort of top 6 teams, I should say. No, it is top 8. Yeah, I'll have to sort of think about that a little bit further, but maybe it's just like a shorter season. You get to like 60 games as the trade deadline goes, and then you have your playoffs from there. So basically, the top 8 still do what they do. They still compete for a championship. The play-in has been good in theory. I still think like the play-in for me is too many of the same teams all just playing against each other, and it's like, no offense to the Chicago Bulls franchise, but it's bums like Chicago, and no offense to the Atlanta Hawks,
Wow.
but it's bums like Atlanta who just seem to play each other every single season. Like, it's only been interested in the West, the play-in, really. In the East, it's the same teams every season. Miami, I could honestly predict the play-in team before the season starts. Orlando. So I'm just saying, like, scrap the play-in. Top 8 teams go straight into the playoffs from there, and the teams who are below that, the bottom 7 in each conference, play each other for who should play for who should have the top draft pick. So you basically incentivize these teams to, not only are they playing against each other, but they have to win. They can't just keep losing in order to get those high draft picks. What do you think, Drew?
So when you talk about this losers bracket, the team that actually wins out, kind of like a March Madness NCAA tournament style, gets the number one pick. right? Is that
Yep,
what you're alluding to?
that's
Okay.
what I'm alluding to.
Yeah. Here's the only one little issue with that, Josh. What if you're actually bad? You see what I'm saying here? So what if you are actually a bad team and you actually need a superstar and you actually need a number one pick? What happens then? Because if it, let's look at the scenario now. Let's take the teams that will fall into this category now. Okay, so we would say that who would we say are probably the favorites to win it? I wouldn't be surprised if New Orleans won it, and they're the worst team in the NBA at the moment. Um, who else would we say have a great opportunity to win it? Um, yeah, let's
I
just
guess
use New
I guess
Orleans.
I guess Sacramento. Like I know they obviously are like kind of tanking in the last few weeks, but they're also legitimately a bad team as well.
Yeah, so okay, let's make it simple for you. So let's say that Sacramento is the worst team in the NBA. I don't have the standings up right now, but they're down there. I
They
just
are, yeah.
pulled them up. Yeah, they are. Okay. You tell me, Josh, what are the chances of them winning this tournament?
None.
Exactly. Sacramento has absolutely no chance of winning this tournament because they are god awful, right? So that means that's what I mean. Like I love this. I love the idea of this system. It is simple. I think this is more entertaining because this would be fun to watch, right?
For
See the
sure.
bad teams go after it and really fight for something. But you know, it's just like the NFL. This is why the NFL works so great, is because the worst teams get the number one pick, and you see the parity around the NFL. It changes every single year. Because the bad teams actually get rewarded. It's a lot more complicated with the NBA. And so you're saying a team like Sacramento would not get rewarded, who, Lord knows, they need some talent in that organization. So I don't, I like the entertainment aspect of it, but it's still not going to solve the issue, in my opinion.
Yeah, I guess the tricky thing is, which my sort of idea probably doesn't account for, is if stars get injured, because you could be a bad team where like your star player gets injured. Like for someone like Sacramento, for example, I I kind of wouldn't have an issue because Sacramento fans are fuming at Vivek, the owner, saying that he's not put like pulled it out enough in the last few years. The finances have not been there. They traded away Halliburton and all that kind of stuff for basically what came to nothing. I know Sabonis has been a good player for them, but like they traded away the best seasons of their franchise. Basically, De'Aaron Fox as well alongside Sabonis traded him away for nothing. So you basically got a situation where Sacramento are angry with the owner. Well, you set up so that as the trade deadline's about to end, an owner like Bivek has to go into the market to go and sign a star to make sure that they're not a bad team. Again, the tricky thing is where like if you're the Indiana Pacers, for example, what's the Indiana Pacers incentive to go and win this like tournament when Tyrese Halliburton sat on the sideline? They're not going to trade away an injured Tyrese Halliburton to go and get a star to make sure they get that number one pick. So there's maybe some kinks to iron out for my idea. Is there anything that you've been thinking about, Drew, in terms of like beyond that sort of idea with the ping pong balls, in terms of like teams playing each other, or are you just sticking to flattening the odds?
I honestly really try to sink my teeth into this issue and try to figure out what I personally think is best while trying to sieve through all of the ideas that's been put in the atmosphere. And again, for me, it's just too complicated. And I just come to the conclusion that it's very unfortunate that we're at this point that we even have to discuss this topic. That's flattening the odds. Probably the best scenario I see. Let's just let the best man win. Like let's put 14 balls in there. Pick number one. Pick number two. Because then like the only incentive to lose would be to make sure you don't make the play in or playoffs, right? Other than that, like there's no incentive if you finish the 30th team or if you finish the 20th, right? So I think that is the most clear, fair, less confusion way that we could do this thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna save Drew's brain for now and let him put it on ice. We're gonna tank the anti-tanking measures on crossover the pond here because it's being discussed from pillar to post really, and this season is going to be what this season is. These teams that are tanking are still going to tank, and they're all going to do it in different ways. By the way, like I watched the Clippers play the Kings the other week, and the Kings just pulled all their guys off in the fourth quarter. Which, by the way, like the Kings were winning the game going into the fourth quarter. They had a genuine chance to beat the Clippers and cause what was an upset at the time because it was still a Clippers team that didn't look like didn't basically have Kawhi Leonard saying that they were completely done in terms of contention. So. Yeah, a very strange time for a lot of those teams at the bottom. Teams at the top, scratching their heads much more. But a few teams sort of in the midst of that, Drew. One franchise that I may have called a bum franchise before. I didn't mean it, Atlanta Hawks fans. I promise. I've got the ATL hat, just as you can see there. I promise you, I am an Atlanta Hawks lifer in this situation, and it was great, Drew. Like it's been great watching the Atlanta Hawks over the past week. I'm pretty sure they're like 3-1 or something. It is. Over the past few weeks. Yeah, 3-1 in their last four over the past week. But Jonathan Kuminga makes his debut at home in Atlanta, and he absolutely goes off. And like I just kept thinking, like for all the chat that's happened with Kuminga across, all of the trade window, if you wanted to call it that, felt like basically throughout the entire season, really. For him to turn up in the game where Trae Young returning in street clothes. It just felt like fitting to me that you had this new guy, him coming off the bench, so that kind of answers the fitness issues in terms of, how does he fit alongside Jalen Johnson? I know Jalen Johnson obviously goes down with an injury in this one, only plays 6 minutes. But Jonathan Kuminga comes off the bench, scores 27, looks fantastic, and suddenly I'm like, well, like where can the Hawks go? The answer is probably only just to the play-in. The East is obviously wide open, but this is a good young core of a team led by a vet like CJ McCollum that I think can go places, if not this season, then in the future.
Yeah, I just want to pump the brakes just a little bit on Atlanta because they've won 3 out of the last 4, but 3 of those wins are against the Brooklyn Nets, the Washington Wizards. They lost to the Miami Heat, and then they beat the 76ers, who we know the 76ers are on a roller coaster. They were out Embiid, they were out Paul George. So, those aren't any wins that I would really chalk up and say that my season is turning around. However, this is a young team that does have a lot of talent, and they have length and they have depth, and it's something that you can build with. And then they also have a guy that maybe so, a superstar to go on to that depth, length, and youth. Is those 3 things I always continue to say on this podcast. That's important for an NBA franchise. And then you sprinkle a little superstar on the top of it, and you have something. And Kuminga, he's obviously talented, but he is a big question mark because we don't know. Like he hasn't had the opportunity he wanted in Golden State, but I like the fact that now, whatever you think about his talent, now you have to understand that there's a chip on his shoulder. And I talk about this all the time as well, that he's going to be highly motivated to prove Golden State wrong, that they made a mistake. And right out the gate, game one, he does that. And I'm really intrigued to see and how this thing finishes up. I think if they finish outside the plan, they become a lottery team, and they get one more piece, then Atlanta is knocking on the door and being a solid team moving forward. We saw at the beginning of the season the stretch that they had, that they were, when they went on that West Coast swing, I think they won like 7 out of 8 or something. And they showed their potential. Still a lot of question marks against Dyson Daniels, who's shooting like 14% from the three-point
Crazy
line.
drop off.
Oh,
Yeah.
unbelievable. But other than that, like I like what I'm seeing from Atlanta. I want to watch this space when it comes to Kuminga and see that tug of war and who's the alpha dog, because you got an all-star in Jalen Johnson that, you got to always remember that pride thing. Is he going to be accepting to, here's another guy, but who's going to be Robin? Who's going to be Batman? And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out for the rest of the season. If they can figure that out, that's going to give them a head start for next season.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of like having, balance, using the bench basically for the balance where you like stagger the minutes of Jalen Johnson and Jonathan Kuminga. Obviously, if this was to be a playoff team at some point in the future, you have to find a way to, get them both on the court at the same time. But I feel like the bench player is kind of like an overlooked art these days. Like I grew up in the era of like watching Jamal Crawford for the Clippers, who was like so important to the Clippers in terms of his score an injection off the bench in that Lob City era, and like that was something that used to help guys get paid. In theory, obviously the money is way more ridiculous these days than it used to be. But I think that's like a little bit of an overlooked thing now. Is that like if you bring in a couple of good guys into a team, like one has to be, they both have to be the certified starters kind of thing. Like I look at the Orlando Magic in the last few games, and it's a little maybe teaser for something I'm going to talk about a little later, but they've got two stars who play in the exact same way, really. And I'm not saying you could play Franz Wagner or Paolo Banchero off the bench, because I think that kind of is maybe a little bit of an undersell on one of those guys' talents. But I don't know. There's a part of me which would like to see the return of the sixth man as an art to the NBA, Drew, because I think that it has become a bit of a dying thing, or at least a thing that NBA fans kind of overlook in discussions.
Yeah, and the most promising thing when you look at Atlanta, before you move on, is six guys had double figure shot attempts, and Kaminga did that off of 12 shot attempts. So that is very, very encouraging. So let's watch this space. Yeah, I mean that's really a great point you bring up, because the six men, when you think of that, you think of Lou Williams, you think of Jamal Crawford, but who is the 2000 and who's this next generation's six man? It's a question to be asked.
Absolutely. Everyone's here wondering about face of the league. This is me and Drew getting into the real conversations here. Who's the real sixth man? Don't worry about that face of the league nonsense. We're always going to do the understated stories here, of course, on Crossover the Pond. But while we're on the stated stories, Drew, I want to talk a little bit about the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's a team that we've actually given a lot of light to this season, but being honest, like if you look back at the trade deadline and the trades that were made, and I kind of alluded to this, if not last week, maybe the week before, once the trade deadline had closed, a lot of the teams that bought are losing teams who've now sat loads of those guys for the season, or like the interesting trades were kind of made at the bottom of the NBA, really. The one interesting one that was made at the top of the NBA was James Harden to the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cleveland Cavaliers, since the James Harden trade, is 6-1, and Harden has really made a difference. And I think it's partly because like teams are still having to figure out like what James Harden is in terms of his role for the Cleveland Cavaliers, but also because of how much he will literally bring to the court for the Cleveland Cavaliers. And it's all things that I said really at the time of the trade, in terms of it's now that backcourt's not got the same switchability for other teams in terms of like feasting on Darius Garland as it does with James Harden, because at the very least, say what you want about how James Harden is lackluster sometimes in terms of his mentality when defending. He is a defender who can get in there with the steals, get in the passing lanes. He's got that sort of swipe down technique, which has been a real success from down the years, and he's also a big body. So if you've got a guy trying to post up on James Harden, he's going to be harder to back down than a Darius Garland. And I think you are seeing this come to fruition a bit for Cleveland in the past week or so, is that James Harden has really lifted, if not the floor of this team, then definitely the ceiling, I think.
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. And what James Harden may lack in a lot of areas, and you may look at Garland, he's 10 years younger, he's more explosive, but the category that you cannot, there is not a question mark on, is the IQ. That's really what stood out to me in this move for Cleveland. And that is a huge win last night over New York. New York is one of those teams that you think got to be knocking on the door of the Eastern Conference Finals this year. And, New York comes in and they take care of them pretty easily, 15-point win. But what has been the knock on Cleveland this season is that they're not the same team as last year, because last year you got to it wasn't really sustainable, right? They shot the most threes, they made the most threes, they had the highest percentage. But, we know this is a make or miss league. All of a sudden, they're still taking those threes. This year, they're not making them. And so there wasn't really another plan B when it came to Cleveland. They were known as being really soft, specifically Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. But when you look at bigs, right, like what motivates them? It's the touches. Right? You give them a couple of lobs, you give them a couple of drop-offs, all of a sudden they screen a little bit harder. They sprint back on defense, they block shots, they're more engaged. And I think that was the issue with the front line of Cleveland, is they weren't consistently engaged because they weren't really getting the ball. Because we talked about it on here that Mitchell isn't really a playmaker, although he's improved in that area this season. Like, he's a bucket getter Mobley isn't really a playmaker either. So you didn't have anyone to really spoon feed those bigs. And now we know Harden, what's his MO? Like he's going to dance with the ball, get inside the paint, and just throw it up there. We've already seen a couple of lob dumps. We even seen a lob dunk to Donovan Mitchell on the break. And so just his IQ, the way that he sees the game, the way he's going to make things really much easier for those bigs is why they're 7-1 or whatever they are, and they're really rolling. He just really just kind of fit in quite easily. And I want to give Cleveland some plaudits because that's a big move because you got to think like James Harden's going to want to discuss that contract here pretty soon. And I like the fact that Cleveland pushed all that aside and said, you know what, there's an opportunity in the East because it's so open. Let's just push our chips to the middle of the floor and bring them in. And it's paid dividends so far.
Absolutely, yeah, and sacrificing, what I think a lot of Cleveland fans thought was a part of their future in Darius Garland to, get 10 years older with James Harden as well. One player who, I don't think you mentioned there, Drew, too much, but who you could definitely say has benefited from this trade so far is Jarrett Allen. Like, Jarrett Allen has really come to the party, and it's no surprise James Harden is a man who's got, lots of centers paid down the years, the pick and roll game. Like, I give James Harden a lot of credit for the development of Ivica Zubac even in his time as a Clipper. Like you are seeing that with Jarrett Allen now since James Harden came into the Cleveland Cavaliers franchise. Like, Jarrett Allen has, of course, had lots of injury issues at the start of the season, but you see in a healthy version of him now. You saw a 40-point game from him even on the 2nd of February, just before James Harden came in. So crazy statistical nights, but then since then, like, consistent numbers across the board, really. Games with 20 points, over 10 rebounds, exactly what you'd want from like an elite level or star center, you should say. And Jarrett Allen has not, traditionally been that for Cleveland, really, in terms of the score and sort of touch. But that's what James Harden can bring to you, as you say, when you reference the lob dunks and things. So definitely interesting to keep our eyes on Cleveland, and they, are a perfect segue really into the contender race.
Yeah, I was just going to say quickly, like I'm looking at Jared Allen's last 5 games. He's had 4 consecutive double doubles, and
Yep.
I've covered Cleveland um, a couple of times this season, and that is not a stat I have seen. So in his 5th game, that game that he didn't get it 5 games ago, he had 21 points and 9 rebounds. So he's knocking on the door. So something to keep your eye on.
Absolutely something to keep your eye on, in the same way that Cleveland are in terms of contention for the NBA championship. Me and Drew have referenced it over and over again on the pod this year that the East is so wide open. Like, there is potential for any team really to come out of that. The West is a little bit more tight I guess when I say tight, in terms of the Oklahoma City Thunder are of course going to be the team that finishes top of that during the regular season. I can't see any way, even with the San Antonio Spurs amazing win streak that they're on at the moment, that they catch the Oklahoma City Thunder. But in terms of who can come out of the West, it's only really a couple of teams that you can see it being, whereas it could be anybody out east. And we saw the other night, Drew, with the San Antonio Spurs against the Detroit Pistons, that there's going to be some absolute slobber knocker matchups in this playoffs to come. Like, it's genuinely a shame that there aren't more like intra conference, not inter conference, intra conference matchups in the playoffs. Like, we only get that one between East and West in the finals, because I don't know if you caught this Spurs Pistons game, but God, it was like a serious championship level basketball game. And once again, Victor Wembanyama just showing why everybody calls him the alien.
Yeah, it was a great game if you didn't get an opportunity to see this game. And it was awesome to be able to see the difference in style of play from the Eastern Conference and Western Conference, where the East is a little bit more physical, a little bit more rough around the edges. And then when you look at the West, it's a lot more superstar potential. It's a lot more finesse. And that's what you saw in this game. San Antonio, they were involved in a bar fight, right? And Detroit were really physical with Wemby. They threw him down on the ground a couple of times. And what I loved about Wemby, he showed me a lot in this game, is he didn't get drawn into that at all. Detroit's really good at that, right? They're good in pulling you into the bar fight and knocking out teeth and things like that. But Wemby said, no, he just got straight back up and ran down on the other end of the floor. And this is a huge statement when that San Antonio guy, and it just says a lot when it comes to the playoffs. What do they not have? And I think someone just mentioned it, or I seen it just float around X, is that you got Wemby, who is comfortable playing the 4 and the 5, right? So you could throw him down at the 5. He can go down low. He can change shots below, but then also you can use him as a stretch 4, right? And so, in the versatility that San Antonio has with the guards, the guard play, you consistently have three guys on the court that can get downhill, that can get in the teeth of the defense, and the defense has to respect that, right? That creates gravity, and all you got to do is just throw the ball somewhere near the rim, and Wemby's going to get it. So that was a great matchup, and what we're going to say. I mean, I just watched Orlando Lakers this morning. Like, this is what we talked about last episode. Is this time of year, once you get past the All-Star break, like that switch kind of flips because the teams know, like, there's less than 30 games remaining. Like, this is the final sprint to the playoffs. And, you could find yourself either in three tiers. Either you in top four and you get home court advantage, or 4 and 5, you're on the road and you're going to be playing the number one seed, which is in the West. You're going to be playing OKC. In the East, you're going to be playing at Detroit. Or you find yourself 6 and lower, you're in the play-in game and you might not even make the playoffs. So teams know how important this stretch is, and that game was a great foreshadowing of the next 2 months of what we're going to see.
Absolutely, and a possible foreshadowing of the NBA Finals. Who knows? I feel like Detroit are being
Oh,
written off an awful lot. It's funny you referenced the bar fight there. I was just thinking they actually kind of missed Isaiah Stewart in this one, and I mean that in more ways than just the bar fight. Like, obviously he could be, another person to wind up Wemby on like a, just a off the court kind of way, but literally on the court as well. Like, the thing that you miss because Wemby is able to mix it up. Jalen Duren is not like the greatest perimeter defender. I think he's certainly better than a couple of other NBA centers because he's got a little bit more of that athleticism. But he's still a big dude. He's still a lot of weight to move around to the perimeter, and he's not a guy that you want to be seeing out there all too much. So Isaiah Stewart is that kind of guy who can give you that bit of flexibility, someone who can take a bit of the responsibility off Jalen Duren, and then as you referenced with the guards who can get downhill, you leave Jalen Duren to kind of like wander around the paint and be the ultimate help defender in there because the block shots from Jalen Duren this season have been one of the big highlights of his game, really. So a really interesting matchup between Detroit and San Antonio. But it brings us on to nicely, Drew. Talk about a couple of the other teams up the top of those standings. The Oklahoma City Thunder, I don't know if anyone could kind of call it like a blip. It was a blip in terms of the standards that we were kind of expecting. Like, we expect them to maybe be the ones to break Golden State's record. That has completely, ebbed away from them now. There's a couple of other really interesting teams, I think, out west before we get on to, a couple of them out east who could be contenders. Like Denver is someone I'm going to talk about a little bit in my bold predictions because there's some really interesting stats around them this season. They've had a torrid time with injuries, really. Houston, I think, have maybe just had one injury too many now. I think I talked about that on the last episode with you. Like, I just think there's a team that's really missing Steven Adams now. You see it when they play, and you see it in KD's minutes load as well. I'm pretty sure that KD is one of the top minutes played in the NBA this season, which, like, for a guy at his age, just shouldn't be the case, especially in the regular season. Maybe when it gets to playoff time and it's clutch time, of course, but I don't know. I'm not necessarily believing in Houston's upwards potential at this stage, but then Minnesota is someone who, with the addition of Ayo Dosunmu in the trade, just before the trade deadline, he is someone who I think can make a difference to this Minnesota Timberwolves team. They've got Mike Conley back now. I think there's a few really interesting teams in there. I'm deliberately going to leave the Lakers out. Feel free to include the Lakers if you'd like to, Drew. I just think there's some really interesting stories at the top of the West there.
yeah, it is. But when you really break it down, I mean, right now I'm looking at the standings, and if you think about OKC and their dominance, right? The superstar Shea is out. How long has he been out now? 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe. You think this is the chance. This is the chance to pounce. Well, they're 7-3 in their last 10 games without
Yeah.
him. And you look at the West. There's only two teams that's better than 6-4 over the last 10 games, and that's San Antonio and OKC. I think, and this is my hot take. I think because we've been salivating over the West all season long, but I actually think there are more, but there are more participants out of the East that are championship caliber than there are out of the West. Because you just mentioned it. Like Houston, they don't have a point guard. They melt down the stretch. Denver, are they going to be healthy or not? Minnesota, they have been way too up and down like a yo-yo. Lakers, we're not even going to include them in the championship talk. Besides those teams, like who else you got, right? So to me, the only legitimate championship caliber teams are San Antonio and OKC. Denver, if they're firing, and that's a health question. So we could say three. Well, let's take a look at the East, right? We know Detroit is going to be there, right? Even if they fight their way through, they might not be able to shoot, but they're going to beat up a couple of people to get there, right? Boston, they're 9-1 in their last 10 games, four-game
They
winning
don't need
streak.
Jason Tatum. Why is he coming back?
I mean, they did that train just keeps on moving in Boston. You got to think that who's going to want to play them with that experience that they have. New York, we know New York is up and down, but when they are their best version of themselves, they got everything. They're deep, and they just signed Jeremy Sohan to bring another Rough Rider to the party along with Alvarado. Those two acquisitions were specifically for the playoffs because sometimes, Cat get labeled as soft. Well, this team ain't soft anymore when it comes to those two acquisitions. And then we know we just talked about Cleveland. They're going to be somewhere around there. Toronto, I won't include them just yet. But Philadelphia is the biggest question mark because it depends on if Joel Embiid is healthy. If he's healthy, you tell me who's going to want to play 7 games with them. So I actually think when you really look at it, like the East kind of scares me a lot more than the West. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm probably the same in that I think there are, I'm gonna say four. I think Philadelphia have now had a little bit too much adversity this season in terms of teams that I think can win a championship. Like the Paul George thing being out for 25 games, I think is just going to stunt him too much. Like I've supported a team that's had Paul George on it, and I can see what he's like when he doesn't have rhythm, or maybe the mental stability is not quite there. Obviously, there's been even if you think about literally in terms of the medication, and we'll have to be careful in terms of the legalities around this, of course, Drew. But like if he's going to be able to keep the mental in check, like what's the medication that he's going to switch on to, which is not a banned substance and things like that. So I'm kind of like, I'm not believing in the Joel Embiid health long term. I'm not necessarily believing in the stability of Paul George long term. Tyrese Maxey is legit, and I absolutely loved that highlight from the other day when he dunks on Ant and stares him down. I'd want to see more of that. I want to see like young bulls really in the NBA, like going at each other and building rivalries for the future, because that's what the best years of the NBA have been built on. Have been built on rivalries between the NBA's best guys, and that's the way it should continue to be. But for me, it's those teams in the top four in the home court advantage spots at the moment. It's maybe like Toronto are a bit of an outlier for me. They're a team that I've watched just a little bit less generally this season. Like, and when I have, I've not found the games like particularly interesting. But they're
I
also not
agree.
like, they're not like a young team. Like it's not one of those teams where I'm like, oh, they'll be much better next season because Bi is like 28 years old. Scotty is of course young, but there's a lot of money on those books into guys like Jakob Pertl who are in the primes of their careers now, and he's been sidelined all season with injuries and stuff. So that's not necessarily a team that I'm seeing as like a development piece, really. Like I think they should be here now, but I don't really think they are. So it's four teams at the top of the East for me. And then I would agree with you on three. Like the Denver health question is a huge if, and Zach Lowe has been saying on his podcast all season, and I tend to agree really, which is why I bring it up, that Aaron Gordon's hamstring may genuinely be the biggest if in the NBA right now. Like if Aaron Gordon is healthy, I could quite I could make a case that Denver are my favourite to come out of the West. I think that they've got enough of a sort of mix and match there to deal with what San Antonio and OKC could throw at them. But I don't know, Drew. Like if you wanted to do favourites from it, I've probably got Boston as my favourite to come out of the East because I've referenced it before. Like people are questioning the Jason Tatum thing too much. I've watched Boston go to a championship where Jason Tatum wasn't the main option on that team. He was the second option to Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown was still the one who was defending the other team's best player in Luka Doncic when he was on the Dallas Mavericks as well. So I think there's a world in which Jason Tatum slots into that perfectly, takes the shots that Anthony Simons has left behind after his trade. And I would probably have San Antonio as my favorite to come out of the West. I may be underrating OKC a little bit. OKC has got plenty and plenty of options they can bring to the party. I wonder how much playoff damage it's done to have Shea out for as long as he's been out for. And there's still the question marks like Casey Wallace and Isaiah Joe have really come to the party over the last week in terms of their sort of points totals. Casey Wallace is a player I'm such a big fan of, by the way. I just don't know if they've got quite enough offensively when everything really slows down in the playoffs. That's the biggest concern with OKC for me. Whereas, like, I'm watching the Spurs basically play playoff basketball night in, night out at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, which leaves us for the question, could it be the Los Angeles Clippers? Could they
uh,
just kind of just while everybody's just kind of beating each other up and the
yeah.
lights are dark, could they just kind of tiptoe themselves over to the podium and be holding the Western Conference stick at the end of it when the lights come on? We shall see.
Do you mean like the team who could get the ping pong ball, the ultimate ping pong ball once all the odds are flat, Andrew? I'm confused by your direction of this here. Yeah, even me as a Clippers homer is not going to back the idea of a Clippers championship this season. But Benedict Mathurin scoring an awful lot of points. I wish he'd score a couple more threes, and then maybe we would be at the party. But there's some things to be excited about for the future of the Clippers. But I don't want to talk about them at the moment. That's for the
That would be
future.
fun.
It would be absolutely fun. I would have a lot of fun. You're right, Drew. But we'll save that kind of talk for the future, and we'll move on to look across the past week first with our understated stories. So I don't know if you want to take the rock on this, Drew. I'm happy to if you'd like me to come out the gate with this.
Yeah, you go and I'll follow you up. Sure.
Okay, I teased it before, guys. We've been low on the Orlando Magic, besides when Dante Marcatelli come on, because me and Drew are nothing if not people who look to impress the guests that we have on here. Dante is still our only guest, actually. We are working to get more of them, and there will be some coming soon. Dante was a great guest, gave us so many reasons to go into that game in London in particular, supporting the Orlando Magic, and they let me down that night, and they've let me down a couple of times since, but is the tide slowly starting to turn for Orlando? I'm looking at the teams who've been good over the past week, Drew, and there are, a couple of teams who've played one more game, which of course helps, and the Atlanta Hawks are part of that. But of the teams who've played 4 games, a joint in fourth, if you're looking at it in that way, there's 3 teams who are unbeaten who've all played 3 games. That's Spurs, the Thunder, and the Celtics. Then it's the Hawks, the Cavs, and the Orlando Magic on 4 games played, 3 wins and a loss. And it's not Orlando in general that I want to talk about because I still think there are some roster construction issues there. It's actually one man who I think can help solve their roster construction issues, who has been absolutely hooping his ass off over this past week, and that is Desmond Bane. If you look at Desmond Bane's stats over the last week, I should say, just absolutely incredible in terms of what he has been able to bring to the party. A 34-point game against the Phoenix Suns, a 36-point game against the Clippers, where he was basically dueling banjos with Kawhi Leonard, and all the great play that Kawhi Leonard and the acclaim that Kawhi Leonard has brought on himself this season. Desmond Bane was right there with him in terms of scoring impetus. In fact, his stats for the season basically closely match that of what the Orlando Magic's best players in Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner have been able to accomplish now in terms of his scoring stats. Paolo Banchero, 21.5 points over the course of the season. Franz Wagner, 21.3 points. Desmond Bane, 20.1. Of course, it's over a larger sample size, but that should be a more impressive feat, really, considering field goal percentage and 3-point percentage, if you wanted to look at that. Big questions, of course, over the 3-point percentage of Paolo Banchero, especially, and Franz Wagner is a fairly inconsistent player from 3. Paolo Banchero, 45% from the field, 31.4% from 3. Franz Wagner, 38% if you're rounding up from 0.9 to 36.5 from 3. Desmond Bane, Drew, 48.3 from the field, 38.8 from 3-point. And if you want to go for good measure on his free throws, 91.3. This is a guy who's averaging 50, 40, 90 over the course of the season, 20 points a game while doing it. He, to me, is a potential key for unlocking the Orlando Magic in terms of if they can be a bit of an upsetter in the East.
That's a nice one. You actually stole my thunder, but
Oh
that's okay.
no!
I got a backup plan. I got an ace up the sleeve because ever since we had Orlando on, I've kind of noticed this Dante affiliation love affair that you've had for him. So I knew that any opportunity that you had to give them the shout, you would. But that is a great catch on Bane. Bane has been hooping. I mean, he basically hit the go-ahead three ball last night against the LA Lakers, and
Yeah,
he just said that it took a little bit of time for him because he's the only new acquisition within this group. And so, earlier in the season, they had the ball in his hands a lot. He was getting downhill a lot, and it really took away from his 3 point attempts. He wasn't taking enough threes, which that's what he was brought in here for. But now he's really starting to settle in with this team. He's starting to find his spots, and you could just tell he has his mojo and he has his confidence. So that makes Orlando a little dark horse in the East. So we shall see. But since you have the happy story, I'm gonna go with the sad story, and I'm
oh
actually
no.
I'm gonna rewind back to a couple of episodes ago. Not a couple. It's probably been about 8 or 9 now that you were on this Chicago Bulls bandwagon. Could they win 5 in a row? And I've watched them, and ever since then, you put the hex on them because ever since this trade deadline, they haven't won a game. They actually have lost 9 games in a row. And so 10 games in a row, excuse
10.
me. I
Big
was I
10.
was I was doing them a favor, and you talk about roster construction. I mean, this roster construction from Chicago is just silly right now. And I think I said this last time we talked about them. What are you doing? So many guards. You got Josh Giddey, who plays as a guard. Bucelas, he's more of a forward. But you got Rob Dillingham, who didn't work out in Minnesota, and we're seeing why. 2 for 9 last night. Trey Jones, who didn't work out in Orlando. You got Colin Sexton, who has bounced around since his Utah days. And then you got sitting there who's inactive. Anthony Simmons, we know what he did in Boston. You got Mac McClung there. And you got Jaden Ivey, who didn't work out in Detroit. And then I don't even know how to pronounce his name, but I think he's the little Asian guy who,
Kawamori, yeah.
yeah, there we go, the one that Ja Morant's like, and I think he's what, 5'2". So I mean, this team has a plethora of guards, but they don't have any good guards. That's the issue. So maybe this team, Josh, has been listening to Cross Over the Pond and actually have been taking notice because you've been saying they've been laying in no man's land around with Atlanta and kind of falling into that playing game every season and then just kind of spinning their wheels and quicksand. And maybe they just said, you know what? Let's just put ourselves out of our misery and go to the lottery. And maybe they're losing on purpose. I don't know if they have their own draft pick, but if they do, then it makes a lot of sense. But this team is just awful.
It is awful, Drew, but I think any Chicago Bulls fans, maybe not necessarily the players, if any of the players are listening, please come on the show. We'd really like that. We'd relish the chance to talk to you. I promise I'm a bigger Chicago Bulls fan than that nasty man Drew Lasker is. But Chicago Bulls fans listening to this will be rejoicing, Drew. They're finally losing basketball games. They would have wanted to go one direction or the other for so long. And finally they are losing. I think that roster construction is completely on purpose, to be honest. I think like the stack up of guards, you need to have rebounding in the NBA to make it anywhere. It's one of the key fundamentals of basketball in general, of course, and they don't have it because they've got guys like Rob Dillingham, who, no offense to Rob, if he was one of the guys who's going to come on, I'm happy to take this back, but he's a slighter frame for an NBA player, let's just say that, one of the sort of smaller guards that exists in the NBA sphere at the moment. So I'm no longer high on the Chicago Bulls, but I'm high on the idea of the future if they're going to be a losing team. They're one of the teams that I would like to get a high draft pick at some point. I would like to see the Chicago Bulls back because I believe that the Chicago Bulls being good is good for the NBA. But we'll move on finally then, Drew, to talk about our bold predictions. And I will let you take the rock on this first. Please don't steal my thunder. I apologise for stealing yours.
That's all right. 1-4 low. Everybody move out the way. I'm about to cross you over at the top of the key, and we're going to Hollywood, baby, because we haven't talked about them in a while. But the Los Angeles Lakers, yeah, I'm talking to you. You just had an 8 game home stretch, and you went 4-4. That's quite disappointing. And we are starting to see the numbers which are when Luka Doncic, LeBron James, and AR play together, they are just not a good team. And I kind of took notice of that at the beginning of the season. AR, they've been hurt at different times, but we're starting to get a big sample size right now. And this team is not very good when all three guys are together. So, their next four games, they split home and away, two home, two away. And they got, I'm going to ask you not your predictions, but what do you think they should go in these next four games? They play at Phoenix, at Golden State, home against Sacramento, home against New Orleans Pelicans. If you just saw that schedule for the Los Angeles Lakers, what do you say they should be out of those four games?
Probably three and is it 4 games, 3-1? I
Yeah,
would
yeah,
say.
yeah. I,
Yeah.
yeah, I anticipated that you would say that. See, I know you, Josh. Yes, you would think that this team would go 3-1 with that very favorable schedule. But I'm here to tell you that when Josh and I get back in this seat, there is going to be a red button that's going to be pushed in Los Angeles because they're going to have to hit the panic button because they're going to actually go 1-3 in these matchups, right? Again, let me tell you the teams at Phoenix, at Golden State, home against Sacramento, home against New Orleans Pelicans. They are going to only win one of those four games, and you're going to start seeing some noise, some rumblings, some rumors in LA. We already saw it last night where LeBron was kind of indirectly passing the baton over to Luka saying, I thought he had a pretty good look. He should have took that shot. That's just a foreshadowing. We're about to see a lot more of that, baby.
Yeah, again on the topic of bad roster construction, that is a badly constructed roster in terms of defense. They've been fake contenders for me all season. Their position in the standings is fake. I don't need more reason to really go in on the Los Angeles Lakers. I just hope, Drew, that one of those losses comes to the Sacramento Kings. My kingdom for one of those losses to be to the Sacramento Kings. Let them beat the Pelicans. Like the Pelicans are getting a couple of wins under their belt. Things are looking a little bit rosier in their garden over the past few games with that 5-5 record. But let them beat the Pelicans. Please let them lose to Sacramento Kings because that would cause probably California to go into meltdown in general as a state because of the difference between NorCal and SoCal there. But I will round off with another negative prediction. I'm afraid, Drew, we're being negative Nancy's on this show this week, but mine's to a team a little bit higher up the standings from the Los Angeles Lakers. I alluded before again within what I was talking about in terms of that championship contention window to the Denver Nuggets. Now, there's a really interesting stat with the Denver Nuggets, which doesn't make for good reading for them, which is that they have lost their last 7 games to teams with a winning record. 7 games in a row they've lost to teams with a winning record. And guess what the Denver Nuggets have got coming this week, Drew? They've got the Celtics, who've got a very strong winning record. They've got the OKC Thunder, who've got a very strong winning record, famously. And they've got the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are a little bit more in their sort of place. But I think the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to be a good team, going to have a lot to say in the playoffs this season. So I'm going to say that this little run where like injuries are happening, these ups and downs, this is a week of downs, I'm afraid, for Denver Nuggets fans. If you're listening, I'm sorry to say it. This is an 0-3 week for the Denver Nuggets. It's going to get to 10 games in a row they've lost
Ouch.
to teams with winning records. I still believe they are championship contenders. This, I don't think, is a wider reflection on the Denver Nuggets. Things have really gone against them this season. I still think they'll pip Houston into that third place spot in the West, but they're going to need to do some serious recovering after this week, I'm afraid.
I have nothing to add to that, sir. You're going out on a limb. Well, basically, when we come back, it's going to be trouble in the West, and it's going to fit my narrative perfectly, which I just said that the East is kind of showing me they have a lot more contenders than the West.
Yeah, certainly some interesting hate watches, if you want to call that, for me and Drew over the next few weeks. We're not going to be preying on anyone's downfall, don't worry, but let's just say I need to recover some of my bold predictions from this season. So if someone could do me a little favour whenever they play Denver, that would be fantastic. But all that is left for me to say before we end this episode is for Drew to lead us out.
Yeah, before you guys go, just take 1 second. Just hit that little like button, that subscribe button, and while you're at it, just write a little comment, a little review. Interact with us really helps. But in the meantime, you know where Josh and I will be a week from now. We'll be back in the saddle to talk about all the highs and lows of the NBA. Have a great week, and we'll see you guys next week.